everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Noemi. I'm Head of Digital Consulting in Asia. I have here with me Tom. Thank you very much for joining and being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been traveling around the region in Asia, right? What made you stop over in Singapore?
To learn. My role is very much about understanding how technology is changing the world. And to do that, you need to get out and experience things. It's been a few years since I've been to Asia for obvious reasons. So I've been on a long trip to observe the changes in the world and to see what's going on.
You're a writer, an author, a thought leader, also a driving digital transformation consulting company, right? So you have all these different aspects. What do you think makes this special, or what is something that you figured really interesting in this part of the world?
I mean, Asia is obviously a very large area with completely different economies and very different societies. It's easy to sound quite cliched, but I think the pace of change is remarkable. It's an area of the world that has sort of constructed itself for the modern era. It's kind of leapfrogged the stages that most of the world went through. So to come out here is to basically experience elements of the future and the past at the same time. And that's always fascinating.
What do you think is the impact of, or the driver of technology in this world? Where do you see examples of technology that has been different applications, different use cases that you find very interesting?
It's certainly a very mobile-centric landscape. When you don't have the legacy of shopping malls, of physical banks, when you don't have a sort of muscle memory of how things have always been, what you see is things created for the first time around mobile behavior. And you realize that an area like retail goes straight from mom and pop shops to delivery drivers arriving at your home. You realize that native applications have changed the very sort of fabric of society. You see a lot of stuff which seems both sort of dystopian and utopian at the same time. So again, incredible emotions are brought up when you see a completely different way to solve the problem. But yeah, if there was one thing that strikes me, it's just the sense that the world has been constructed around very contemporary behaviors and around the mobile phone itself.
Do you see that also in your work when you work as a consultant in your company? How do organizations react to that?
My big problem is making technology seem exciting rather than a threat. I think so many people are instinctively quite scared of change. And in order to bring about behavior change, consultancies have done a lot of creating panic. There's this big sense that you either disrupt or die, or you're either a startup or you're dead. And I think there is a real act to be done, which is to learn from the edge cases, to be very aware of what technology makes possible, but to also appreciate that companies have been successful for many years without changing all of the time. So trying to find a sort of optimistic and clear vision for the future is what I try to do.
What are some trends that you see happening in the future in this way?
There's definitely this enormous reliance on sort of data as the sort of the boss more than vision. I think technology companies in particular, they tend to be very good at A/B testing. They tend to be very good at finding their vision through a sort of robust process of analysis. So when you come to Asia, you kind of see the sort of manifestation of companies that build very quickly, companies that make decisions very quickly, companies that sort of find their product market fit by trying different things. And I find it fascinating because most of the rest of the world has been much more thoughtful. It's been quite user-centric. It's sort of developed things from heart and soul. So more than anything else, to come here is to have appreciation for a different way of doing things, but to really realize that probably the answer is not the false dichotomy of tech versus legacy or Asia versus West. It's to try and find the best of both, I think.
So you recently wrote a book about digital Darwinism. Do you want to share a little bit about how it was that you came up with it, and what did you want to impact, or what was the reasons behind it?
I was quite reluctant to write a book. I'm very good with sort of expressing thoughts and frustrations, and I get quite emotional about the world. But writing a book seemed like a horribly sort of daunting task. So it only happened because people forced me to do it in that format. Even to this day, I hate having a book. I hate this idea that it's a long thing that people spend a lot of time reading and that no one can interact with, and that I can't learn from how people respond to it. But it was trying to put in context this moment in the world. It was trying to sort of understand that technology has come into our lives, and digital technology in particular has been a great way for us to augment the way that we've done things before. But it was trying to get companies to be more ambitious. Like the key question behind it is, what would your company look like if you set it up today? Knowing all you know about competitive threats, about new consumer behaviors, about new possibilities, what kind of company would you make? And it's odd because, as we were talking about before, when you come to Asia, you realize that actually a lot of the companies here are what people would make. These are companies that have built themselves for the modern era. It's exploring the process of getting companies to change and what process do they go through in order to do that best.
What are some success factors for organizations to be able to do better in the digital transformation?
It sounds very simplistic, but I think if there's one theme that companies should keep in mind, it's this idea of customer centricity. It sounds like a sort of throwaway comment, and many companies think they're acting this way. They're really not. If you look at any org chart, the customer is completely ignored. If you look at how companies talk about themselves in annual reports, the customer is ignored. If you look at all the data that's measured, it's always very internal. We need a complete sort of shift in how companies think. It's not about getting better at what you've always made. It's about making better things, whether it's customer experiences, whether it's customer service. Is using the power of new technology and more imagination and more empathy to really serve people in a better way.
What are some examples of companies that do a really good job?
You see little signs of it. What I find, it's easy for people to sort of think I'm quite curmudgeonly or miserable because, perhaps I complain a bit. But you see examples of what's possible. It might be an airline like Delta where you can change your flight, perhaps with 3 button presses. It may be a hotel that finally lets you sort of check in with your face and doesn't ask for your credit card details 7 times. It could be a car rental company where you extend your booking without waiting online for an hour. So you see glimpses. I think the beautiful thing about this moment in time is we have companies that have succeeded for a very long time being brilliant at what they make. And we have these sort of thrusting tech startups that are brilliant at using best-in-class technology and tools to perhaps serve people better. And now is the stage where both of these companies can sort of rise up. Both types can use new technology to serve people better. And I think that's what makes this a particularly interesting time to be a normal human, to be a customer, to be a client, to be a consultant.
You tap in something interesting as well, what we call ecosystem, right? Building up like an ecosystem where startups can interact with the customer, with larger corporations. What's your take on ecosystem and innovation?
I am quite aware that most companies don't really know how to innovate. And I think we have had a lot of stages where the companies have the body language of someone that's trying to innovate, but they don't have the guts or the soul. In particular, I see a lot of sort of gestures of innovation. It's the single bank branch with a Pepper robot. It's the airline that takes Bitcoin, for one route. It's the shop that has a sort of iPad next to the till. We need to understand that innovation is less about the sort of double art feeling on a Friday afternoon at school. And it's much more the sort of robust, methodical process of going through everything that you do and thinking, is this what our company can be? Like, how can we make money in better ways? How can we serve people in more interesting ways? How can we drive incremental growth by making things which have real significance? And I don't think many companies have got that yet. They don't know how to work with startups. They don't know how to do innovation hacks. So I try to guide through companies through a process where they can really mean it. How can they really transform? How can they really innovate? How can they create new things which are not just something for a show and tell, but actually something that's going to change the future of a business?
Something in your book that stuck with me was that culture change comes last. But when I read like similar books that come up with how to help organizations to actually help go through digital transformation, is like you have to work on the culture and you have to build a culture that fosters innovation and you can mistakes and do mistakes and all of that. In your approach, you say this is something that is a product that comes at the end.
I think it's very hard. I think there are 2 ways to do it. One is to change everything, and then the culture is easier to change because everything's in place. The other way is to change the culture, and because the culture is different, you can bring in these people. I tend to think that companies really need to mean this. And it takes a real investment, and it changes everything from people's job descriptions to the types of talent that you hire, to the structure that you operate in, to the technology that you use, to the core sort of mission and purpose of a business. And I think if you try to do that after changing the culture, you'll realize that you didn't know what culture you needed. You almost need to sort of create the container into which the sort of liquid flows somewhat.
We talk about investment, right? You just mentioned it right now. When we think about the economic situation we're in, everybody speaks about recession. Is the time to invest in innovation? Do we see companies actually going down that road? Are they more hesitant right now?
I think the wonderful thing about innovation and transformation is it's kind of unbundled and irrelevant from the real world economy. Like if the economy is going brilliantly, then that means there's more money to invest in innovation. There's more of an appetite for risk. If the world economy is suffering, then there's more need to do things differently. There's more need to sort of work in a more efficient and outlandish and interesting way. So in theory, I think the economy shouldn't really change much. The really hard thing with innovation is to create a business case for something that's never been done. Generally speaking, companies are amazing at repeating the same thing over and over again. I think of sort of infrastructure as a good analogy. Like if you have a sort of railway system that appears to work, it's extremely difficult to create a business case to build a brand new railway system because it continues to work, and that it's not that good and it gets worse every year, and that people go on strike and that the material is degrading. Capital expenditure for something which is bold and dramatic is almost impossible to get signed off in companies, and the business case for the cost of not doing something is never accounted for either. So the real economic problem with innovation is really trying to make a case for something that you know in your heart is a good idea, but knowing that the payback period may take quite a long time, and knowing that people need to sort of put their reputations on the line somewhat as part of that process.
So what are your tricks to convince them they still should do it?
If I'm honest, I think you have to appeal to people's egos. I think companies are full of amazing, well-intentioned, hardworking people. And some people are trying to get by, and some people are trying to make a name for themselves. I say this with no disrespect, but I think you will never get a company to change with people who are trying to hide. You need to find the 1% of people who want to take a risk, who want to get noticed, who want to be proud of what they've accomplished.
I looked at your LinkedIn profile and there was a post that was about AI, and kind of that everybody writes about ChatGPT, and everybody has like this AI machine kind of filling up their social media articles on AI. So the question is, enough of AI? Like, where does it lead us? Where does it bring us? Where do we see benefits of it? And maybe you can share a bit your thought about benefits versus risks as well.
It's quite a big question. The hard thing about technology is people always want to talk about the most outlandish and sophisticated technology. And that's great because it's more exciting. It's great to put on a VR headset. Ultimately, the change that technology brings really comes down to how deeply it's integrated. And often it's really boring technology that makes quite a big difference. It could be something like the API. It could be something like collaborative software. Even the mobile phone sort of feels quite dull, but we haven't really made the most of that. So I think more than anything else, in this world where everyone's got a quick take, people need to take a bit of a step back and think, how can this technology allow us to do our jobs in different ways? What parts of our jobs can be automated? What parts of our jobs don't need to be done anymore? What can we do with this to make us all have a better life? And I worry generally that we're using it to do extra. So it's now, how can even more people try to market to you? How can we create even more content? I think instead we should be thinking less of more and more of better. So how can we make advertising that's better? How can we do customer service that's not cheaper but it's better? How can we use this data to make better decisions? And I think it's going to take us a bit of time to really understand the meaning and the sort of implications and the limitations of some of this software.
You mentioned, or you highlighted a lot of the corporate benefits. If we think about the behavior, I mean, I'm curious to know as well, what is the impact in our behavior as a consumer or as an employee on the other side of things?
It wouldn't surprise me if this technology goes more towards the background for the next year. I think it's very easy to get very exciting about what some of this stuff does. I think ultimately, most people's lives won't change that much. For once, the hype curve is somewhat correct when it comes to understanding artificial intelligence. I think most change that's significant happens with core foundational societal elements. It's things like regulation, it's things like taxation, it's things like governance, it's things like infrastructure. And normally when we sort of sprinkle the technology on like garnish, it changes a few sectors of the world, but it doesn't change that much in how we live our lives. I think probably 2 to 5 years time, we'll start seeing business models that were impossible before. We'll start seeing people do incredible things. We'll start to see education change to make sure that our kids learn different skills and different values. But I think sometimes we all need to calm down a little bit. But the world of social media is full of people who want to get noticed, so it's not that easy.
The hype is really high in the beginning, right? Yeah, it'll be interesting to come back in a couple of years and see what the impact was. It's always easier in retrospective.
Yeah, it's weird. I think people, you never get noticed for saying that the world isn't changing that fast. You never get famous for saying that, broadly speaking, things reflect how things have always happened. And it would be nice if people who are quite often correct and discerning got noticed a bit more.
So if we're going to look back in 10 years on 2023, what will we be known for? What will stick?
That's an amazing question. I don't think it'll feel particularly remarkable. I think we're obsessed with this idea that this moment in time is this pivotal moment where everything's going crazy. I think we'll realize it was just the modern era. Let me put it this way. The mobile phone and the sort of internet and 4 and 3G sort of entered our lives around about 2005 to 2010. And in that time, we saw a crazy change. We saw, the birth of some of the biggest companies the world has ever known. And we saw this sort of frenetic period of activity. And this period of time where everything significant changed. I think we'll probably realize that we needed to change some of the foundational elements of society. What is it like to bring up kids in an era of smartphones? What should education provide people with? How do we have personal relationships in an era of new devices? I think we'll probably see this as the moment where we started to make sense of it more, where we started to sort of be a bit more calm, a little bit more thoughtful, and perhaps use technology for good. I think a lot of technology that we've seen so far has been done because we can. Perhaps this will be the era of using technology for things that we should do.
For example?
Healthcare. How can we use people's data in a way to give them better healthcare? How can we anonymize data in such a way that we understand more about treatments and how they work? But even things like social security, how can we create infrastructure that is more precise in how it helps people? How can we create data systems for things like the police force or for teachers that helps them do their job in a more efficient way? There is so much stuff that can be done. I'm incredibly enthusiastic about the future. I love technology, but I think we need to take a step back and be more thoughtful and improve some of the core systems of the world. How can we create a pricing structure for public transport that enables demand to be spread across the day? How can we build cities that are more sort of human in their approach? There are some really, really exciting things that can be done, and I'm hoping that the next 10 years starts to see that happen. So rather than this sort of approach of changing life like software updates, where you're doing 10 software updates a year, why don't we sort of find a sort of 10-year plan or a 20-year plan? Why don't we create sort of sensible structures and sensible deep change? So I would like to think that this will be the period of calmness where we thought more about the meaning and the implications of technology, and we put in place the infrastructure and the thinking we need to build a better future for everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. I had a really good time talking to Tom. I hope you took something out of it as well. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Tom, for being here as well.
My pleasure.
Hi, I'm Katja Forbes. I'm from Standard Chartered Bank. I think this is a great session for mental refreshment. So much of the time at our organizations, we spend our time doing our work inside our silos, trying to get things done, moving the dial 1 degree. And when you come and listen to a talk like this, you're actually refreshing yourself mentally with a whole bunch of different thoughts, different perspectives, things that are outside your everyday. And I think that helps us see our everyday with new eyes. I think a lot of what we heard tonight is faced by many companies, which is that difficulty in creating change. There are a lot of organizations that I've seen, outside of our business who are seeking to digitally transform but don't necessarily know where to start. They want to engage with us in digital ways and don't know where to start from our client's perspective. So it's really part of what we're doing to enable them to engage with all of our products and services in a digital way. And it's hard. This is hard work for both our organization and for our clients to do as well. Just because we can, does it mean we should? We have to ask the questions about unintended consequences of all of the decisions that we make when we think something is a great, innovative idea. It could be a great, innovative idea, but it could have repercussions that we haven't thought of yet. Things that we need to ask about: how's it going to affect different marginalized audiences, people who we don't immediately think about whenever we're putting something new and interesting into the world? So my bold statement is more, ask the questions, ask the right questions.
So we've heard today that innovation is more than technology. So we actually need to make sure that the technology is adapted and also set in place, and that our human behavior change while interacting with new things that come to market. So of course that matters how big, for example, the companies are that come. So clients which are startups, for example, we see many of them coming, they have struggled. Once they have their ideas, they have the technology set up, but then they typically fail to scale, meaning they're not ready, they don't have the right skills and capabilities to make this to a successful product and to launch it in a bigger market. So that's some of the struggles we see for startups, the gap to scale up. For corporates, typically it's about focus. So what is the right focus? They have tons of ideas, but how to pick the right one, how to prioritize, and then also to action, to not just do the ideation and the early stage, but all the way through to implementing.